Welcome to Advisicon Academy Training. Advisicon is a group of authors, teachers, consultants, and technologists who are passionate about helping organizations maximize productivity by leveraging the Microsoft technology experience. We have over 25 years of expertise helping teams build efficiency utilizing great project management methodology. So stay tuned for some dynamic training.
Are you tired of staring at your project schedules and seeing resource overallocation warnings frantically screaming for your attention for practically all of the resources on your project? Thanks for joining me today to talk about grappling with resources. My name's Ken Lowen. I'm the Director of Client Solutions at Advisicon. And we're going to talk for the next 30 minutes or so about how do we best grapple with the challenges of scheduling resources across multiple projects. There's our friend, the Burning Man. Our structure today, we're going to talk a little bit about an overview of what resource management is so that we understand we're all talking about the same thing and we understand what our goals are. I'm going to highlight for you some of the challenges that we at Advisicon have seen routinely in working with a number of clients around the world in a number of different industries and sizes and complexity of projects. And then I'm going to talk with you about some of the tools that Microsoft Project Online provides us for overcoming those challenges. Let's go and get into this. So, resource management. It really is part discipline and part art. But it comes down to actually making a conscious decision that we want to understand what are the resource requirements in our project. Peter Drucker summed it up by saying time is the scarcest resource, and unless it is managed, nothing else can be managed. PMI, the Project Management Institute, defines resource management as the process of estimating the types and quantities of material, human resources, equipment, or supplies that are required to perform each activity in our project. So let's think about what is it we actually need in order to execute the tasks on our projects. Remember, it's not just people, although we frequently will get ourselves wrapped around the axle thinking about the work and the duration and assigning people, but it's anything that is scarce that we require to execute our project. And so that could be electronic testing software, it could be a physical space in which we perform testing or other activities of our project. It could just be procuring anything that we need in the way of supplies or licenses for our projects. So that's our foundation. That's what we're talking about. Everything that we need to schedule and procure to execute our project. So Advisicon's experience shows us that there are a few really common challenges that are experienced by project managers in managing resources on their projects. Of demand and capacity. Maybe they don't actually have sufficient resources. They've thought about it, but they don't have them. Or worse yet, in terms of challenges, they're not actually managing the effort that is performed by those resources. Or maybe they're just getting too many unplanned resource requests dropping into their email. There certainly are more, but let's take those as our starting point. Does your risk assessment when you're starting to plan a project consider resource availability? Recent events around the world have taught many organizations, whether they are merely a department, a project team, or entire companies, how important it is to plan for sudden unavailability of critical resources. If you've sent your people home to work recently and they're suffering from a lack of high-speed bandwidth, or they had a desktop computer or multiple workstations, maybe they couldn't take them out of the workspace and they need to figure out a way to work at home, and your jurisdiction mandates that you may not stay in the office, that's a resource risk. How complex were your plans previously? Were you thinking about anything even generally at the level of what if key resources are unavailable? Do your projects now have those plans? We want to think about that certainly going forward, and we don't have to wrap ourselves around the axle and think about every possible circumstance that can cause those resources to be unavailable. Just the fact that they could be unavailable, what's the likelihood, and then what are we going to do? Resource demand. Are you actually doing an effective job of estimating resource demand in your project schedules? Are you using consistent processes for your resource demands? How can you get those? Our Project Manager's Guide at Advisicon, where we train project managers, tells about various methods of getting good estimates of demand. Certainly asking the right people. Ask the resource who's performing the work. He or she may have a very good estimate of what should be in the project in order to get the described work done. Asking other subject matter experts, or have you kept the records from past projects? Go look at those and determine what your actuals were in the past, and that may give you a good basis for planning the future. Remember, everything that you're putting into your project schedule at this point is an estimate. You need to anticipate that changes will occur once you actually start executing the project. Everything's an estimate until you start recording actuals. What about capacity? Are you actually accurately estimating the capacity your resources have to perform the work? Wishing or hoping is not an effective method of getting work capacity estimates calculated. Far too frequently, we find situations in which tasks are just assigned with very little consideration of the resource's actual capacity to do the work. We know this because we see project schedules that are lit up. Just as we started, our planning premise coming into this webinar was that we're seeing the resource overallocation indicator all over our project schedule. That specifically tells us that our demand and our capacity are out of line. We can't just sit back and hope the work gets done, because the indicators tell us, based on what we've put as inputs into our project schedule, that there's not sufficient capacity to do the work. So either our plans for demand or our estimates of actual capacity are incorrect if we really think the work can get done. Maybe we actually are planning effectively for demand and capacity, but we just don't have sufficient capacity in our organization. In that case, we've got to either delay the work or we have to procure additional resources. I worked with a client recently where the lack of resources was a risk that they had in prioritizing their projects. So if they had a project which with insufficient resources available, they prioritized it low. We had a really focused conversation around that and said, if you don't have the resources, you can't actually do the project. Your solution to that, or your plan for addressing that, has got to be your project schedule has to include the costs required to obtain the necessary resources. Your project plan has to be the plan that says, with these resources provided at these estimate costs, I will deliver this project on this duration. Given a shortfall in resources, you don't have a plan for moving forward. So as organizations are moving up on the project management maturity spectrum, they're moving from situations in which they're not effectively or consistently managing work. They consider that they're just going to manage tasks, and the demand and capacity are not critical to them. And you need to step up your maturity on that spectrum by learning to measure the work that's being performed. When you manage the percentage of the resources capacity to do work, you're then able to identify underutilized capacity. So you've got the ability to assign more work, or you have resource overallocation, our Burning Man indicator, and you've got too much work assigned. Let your project schedule be a tool that helps you to manage those calculations and manage all of those moving parts. In most circumstances, Microsoft Project is in the background computing the work, the effort, and your resource utilization. So your goal with this is to understand those values as they're being computed and presented to you by project. Remember, your estimates of required work are just that, estimates. They don't need to be perfect, and they don't need to be based on detailed work studies to have validity as a basis for your evaluation. If you start with the information that you have available, That will allow you to build experience and build a database of information that improves your processes. So if you're not focusing on the measurement of work and resource utilization, you're setting yourself up for problems. Unplanned requests. Are you constantly being surprised by requests for resources to serve on projects? Are you frequently going over in your mind the phrase, shall I rush your rush job before I rush the rush job I was rushing when you rushed in? Most organizations I have the privilege to work with are staffed by really hardworking, motivated, skilled teams of people who really are trying to do the best job possible. And all of us have been surprised by events coming up unexpectedly. So in the circumstance where your organization's workflow, your sales cycle, your project intake has rush jobs and surprise projects coming in, maybe you need to plan to set aside some capacity so that you have the ability to respond positively to those requests for resources. But if you're in a circumstance where those unplanned resource requests just come in because you don't have a forward-looking view of resource demand, then you need to start thinking about using something like Project Online as an enterprise project management platform so that you can see your pipeline of proposed projects. You can see what demand is coming far enough in advance to be able to react to it in a thoughtful manner rather than having to wait for the last minute and having every project become a fire drill. So those are the challenges that we're going to focus on looking at today. Let's use the rest of our time together to look at some actual tools that are available to help us to overcome these challenges. First, the Resource Center in Project Online. Let me pull across my web browser window and we'll take a look at that. So I'm looking at a demo environment in Project Online and at my enterprise resource pool. I've pre-selected some resources that sit on a particular team, and I'm going to select the capacity planning view on my ribbon. This presents me a view called Resource Utilization by Project, in which the demand for that particular group of resources, that particular team, is represented across all of the projects in my environment simultaneously. So if I'm a resource manager or a department head or a department supervisor, and I'm trying to view the requirements that the organization has for my team to participate on projects, this view is a great one. The colored stacked bars represent different projects, as you can see from the legend at the right side. The orange line running horizontally between the 600 and 700 levels represents the total capacity this identified group of resources has to execute projects in terms of hours. And I've set this up so that the stacked bars represent months. Within the accuracy of our estimates, the months of August through December look like they are fully scheduled and probably don't have any particular issues to be concerned about. The months before those have some additional capacity in terms of a couple of hundred extra hours of work that maybe I can accelerate some project work into in order to make progress on some projects. Another one of the views that's available to me is this remaining availability view. And in this view, I can see that some of the resources whose lines drop down from the zero line are overallocated. They have negative availability in the months of August through December. Whereas all of the rest of my resources have bars that extend upward, indicating that they've got time remaining, excess capacity in which work can be scheduled. What this is telling me is that I've got unequally assigned project tasks across this team. And so I would look to balance that by shifting tasks from one resource to another resource in order to get them all balanced out. This tool is really, really helpful, and it's current and up to date as soon as every project is updated by its individual project manager. So I get real-time information. Power BI reports. Power BI is a great tool for us also in that it allows us to mine the data in Project Online with a great deal of granularity and a great deal of power. Power BI allows us nearly infinite capabilities to build reports about our project schedules, about our resources, about the demand and capacity, and we can even pull in information from our business system so that we can look at actual costs or budgets, information in concert with our project-related information. Power BI actually has a capability to pull in data from about in excess of 80 different types of systems. Virtually anything that's got an applications programming interface can be mined by Power BI. And Project Desktop. The various views available to us in Project Desktop give us a lot of capability from mining data also. Here's my Project Desktop tool opened to a particular project schedule. And so this is our standard Gantt chart view, which allows us to see the Burning Man indicator in the indicators column at the far left for these tasks. This is where we started our presentation today, saying, I'm burdened by this. How in the world am I going to deal with it? Project Desktop is teed up to support the project manager in addressing these issues as soon as they become visible. So while the project manager is working with his or her project schedule, he or she has the real-time information about availability and constraint of resources across the entire portfolio of projects. So it's important to note that these overallocation indicators are the result of task assignments in other projects as well as in this individual project. But I'm the project manager for this project, so I'm looking at it in the context of needing to get work done myself. If I right-click on my resource overallocation indicator, I get the task inspector available in my context-sensitive window, and I can pull this up. The context-sensitive window for the task inspector now tells me specifically the overallocation indicator is because Martin is overallocated. It gives me one-touch buttons that allow me to take quick action about that overallocation. I can level these tasks using the resource leveling and let project automatically find available time using the enterprise calendars and that resources availability across our portfolio. Or I can choose to analyze this in more detail and go look at the overallocated resources in my team planner view. I'm going to choose to move to the team planner view now. And in the team planner view, I see all of the resources on my project in the left window. And these resources appear with the resource overallocation indicator, and they're in red text, just indicating to me that they are all overallocated. Additionally, I see in blue the tasks for this particular project. I see gray indications of other projects and commitments that these resources have made. And I see in these red braces the days that this resource is specifically overallocated for. Let's double click on this task and find out some more information about it. We get our familiar task information window just as if we were opening this from the Gantt chart, and we can go to the Resources tab, where we see that our resources are all assigned 100% to this task. That causes us to take a critical look at what else are we seeing in the window. In the window, I'm seeing that these resources have got this other commitments. So not only are they 100% allocated to this task, but this particular resource is also assigned to at least one task on at least one other project. Hence our problem. The default behavior here in project has assigned this resource to 100% of his or her capacity for 100% of the duration of the project. of the task. It's very possible that that same thing has happened in the other project that this resource is scheduled on. And so if you assign a resource more than 100% of his or her capacity, then he's going to be overallocated. This is a very, very common item when project managers are first importing projects into Project Online, because when they've been managing their projects on a standalone basis, this combined portfolio-wide resource demand and capacity information just isn't available to you, and so you're not seeing the impact of your multiple projects on each other. And all you're experiencing is the communications offline about resources not getting to tasks or resources being overallocated, the root of our problem. So this improved view in Project Online helps us to quickly and efficiently estimate and understand resource demand across our project portfolio. In Project Desktop, we've also got a view called the Resource Graph, which allows us to see highly summarized information, the peak units that are assigned to a particular resource. And this view can be shifted to looking at it by year, quarter, month, week, day, and so on, depending on how detailed a view we really want to have and need to have in order to best understand our resources demand from projects. You see also the breakpoint between the blue and the red segments, which indicates the point at which this resource is fully allocated. And so we can see that across the duration that we're looking at, we have periods in which our resource is fully allocated, periods in which our resource is not allocated any work at all, and periods in which our resource is overallocated. Again, an unbalanced approach that being able to look at our views across the portfolio will allow us to better fix and assign that resource work in a more balanced view. Our initial planning premise today was that we're tired of dealing with the overallocation of resource overallocation indicators. We're receiving far more than we deserve. We've got some tasks that we can do ourselves in order to solve those problems. Remember that resource management is not an optional activity. Ignoring the concepts of resource management will cause our issues. We've got to understand at some level how to estimate our requirements for materials, people, equipment, and supplies. We don't have to be perfect about that, but we've got to seek to make estimates that are realistic so that we can apply our estimates of project demand against those and get some real-time information back from the project schedule. There are some very, very common resource management challenges that are encountered in the majority of organizations we work with, and we can help them and you overcome those. So once you've determined to become effective project resource managers, and that doesn't mean managers of just people, there are easily accessible tools that can help you to solve those problems. The place to start is by managing our portfolio of projects in an enterprise project management platform like Project Online that I showed you today. Those tools are industry standard, they're easily learnable, and they provide a wealth of information. So analyze your data and learn the lessons that it's trying to tell you so that when you plan your next project, it's planned to succeed. Thanks very much for your time to participate in our webinar today. We look forward to hearing from you via email and our portal for any questions.